let's do the rest of the chapter and be done. So by the way, because you haven't turned in a paper yet and need to turn in a paper, hold on, my brain just shorted out. 24th. Right. The final paper is due today, so if you need to turn it in, if you're going to turn it in, make sure you try to get it to me by the end of the day today, if you can. I can only accept it so late because not next Tuesday, but the next is when grades are due, and that's it. There's nothing more I can do. So get them in. And if you're going to do it, I don't know if you've already done your first one and you're happy with your grades so far, then you're fine. If you need to have a grade dropped, including maybe you weren't able to get into, well, I think everybody in this class got into all the tests fine. Yeah, if you need a grade drop, make sure you do that second paper. Anyway, this is where we ended. Oh, I guess one other thing before I forget. Next Monday is going to be our review. So we're going to go over what's going to be on the final. And then after that, well, for those of you online, the final is, I'm just going to post it next Tuesday and give you guys the whole week to figure it out. Hopefully you can get it done, because after that, I can't take late submissions. So, paper today, next Monday, review, next Tuesday, I'll put the test up, and you guys will have until the following Tuesday to finish it. And then it will have to be done. I'm going to set it for probably at noon that day, because I need to get it done by the end of the day, Tuesday. So, and not just you guys, it's the issue. Anyway, and then for those of you in here who are not in here right now, just as a reminder, technically our final is 2 Mondays from today. Not next Monday, but the Monday after. But I will be here Wednesday and Friday, 8:30 to 10:30, with my other classes, and you're welcome to come in and go ahead and get it over with. So, yeah. Anyway, let's get this chapter done before my throat just collapses. So yeah, we talked about the end of, well, not the end of the plague. Excuse me, but at least the last part in that particular section. Let's see. Right. So, yeah, again, it's like a third to a half the population died. I mean, it wasn't pretty. But when you've got that many people dead, you don't have enough people to bury the ones that are dead, and the ones that are still alive are typically they're not fully healthy. We've gone through the famine, 7 years of famine, and typically the people who are still alive have still caught the disease. They just survived it, but it doesn't just go away and you're totally fine. It leaves you physically and often mentally scarred, and at the very least, much weaker. So, yeah, it was a bad time for Europe. We, of course, have the plague doctors that I mentioned before. But the responses to this. So, what did Europe make of itself following all of this? Well, medically, if you survived the plague, you were now immune. Again, the plague was a bacterial infection, so if you got it again, your body would know how to fight it off. Because unlike a virus, like the current thing, which can mutate and change, and so if you've caught it and your body develops immunities, or you take a vaccine, which is basically the same thing, or at least your body treats it the same. When a virus evolves, it can just get around that. That's the issue with the virus. With a bacterium, yeah, they evolve, they change. In fact, we've got all sorts of studies of like bacteria in hospitals, especially being dangerous because they've just been living around disinfectant and have developed an immunity. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm getting off track. If you survive the plague, you are probably going to be okay. Great, because it kept coming back. It's the thing. It wasn't just like one big thing and then it's over. Unfortunately, you can't pass that on to your kids. This isn't a genetic adaptation. This is something that your body adapted to via, the immune system, how the immune system works. And so the next generation of kids, when the plague rolls back through, which it did like every, I want to say 10 to 15 years. So if you had kids like right after the last bout of plague, they would be children, teenagers, maybe, by the time another wave of plague hits. You're fine. You might get sick, but it's not going to kill you. Half of the kids, half of the new generation are going to die because they don't have immunity. It can't get past. So it got to the point that, as the book says here, the European population was at a standstill until about the 15th century. So, like, obviously the population will go up, but then every decade, 15 years, the plague would sweep through, take out about half the population, and it never had the chance to grow, is the point. As many people were dying as they were being born, essentially. There is no year-to-year growth. Economically, it was kind of a weird, sort of positive thing. So due to population not being a thing, overpopulation not being a thing anymore, because again, a third to a half of the population was gone, there was more land for those who were still alive. Workers could charge more for their labor because, well, there were less workers to go around, and the people who need them to farm, which is to say everybody, would need to pay them more. So this resulted in a small degree of weakening among nobles and strengthening for commoners, at least in terms of their political power. It does seem weird that like the less you have, the more powerful you are, but it's just because you have to have peasants, you have to have commoners to grow your food, and if you're not willing to pay them enough, and slave labor isn't really a thing in Europe, really, you can't just like force these people into work. I can't really say that. Most cases you can't. It's not as simple. So yeah. Socially, peasants demanding more for their labor. Nobles were trying to return things to the way they were before the plague hit. Which resulted in a lot of uprisings, which, as I've mentioned before, when you have peasant uprisings, these aren't little things where the peasants were like, oh, we're not happy with the way things are. We're going to, march in the street like the way the news tries to say our riots today. No, they would go in, they would get into these manor houses, pull the nobles out if the nobles were lucky, they were killed in the process. If they weren't, they were roasted alive over fires. Um, it was rough. Uh, so yeah, we had the Jacquerie, for example, in France. Um, it's a it's based on like the closest I can think of is like a minstrel, a stage performer who played the like lovable idiot character. Obviously, these were not a bunch of lovable idiots. They were peasants who were murdering nobility. Uprisings in England over a poll or head tax in Italy. So there was a lot of that. However, the nobility still controlled the armies. So these uprisings would crop up, burn down a bunch of manors, kill a bunch of nobles, and then once the nobles got organized, the military would go in and just completely slaughter the nobles, the commoners. So it didn't really get anywhere, but it did show that the peasants were not going to be pushed around like they had been. Towns recovered faster than the countryside. Farmers were more willing to go into towns because, well, you could make more money in towns, and if we just had the plague and everybody's dead, your main goal is to survive. And also, due to the uncertainty of whether you were going to live or die from day to day, which was even more so than it had been previously in the Middle Ages, this resulted in more adventurous economics, as the book puts it. And the example I used was more mines being opened up in Germany. Basically, people were like, if I waste all my money trying to build an iron mine or something, well, who cares? I'm not going to live very long to worry about the debt. So there was a lot more adventurous economics happening, which in the long term was good for the overall, economic prosperity of the people. I'm sure in the shorthand it was dangerous for whoever was doing it, but again, if you were going to die, who cared whether you had money or not? Religion was hit real hard. Because there was the emphasis on communal living, the monks and monasteries and all of that. We had priests and monks and etc. dying in huge numbers. So many priests died in the town of Bath, which is where, Bath and Wells, that's in England. The laymen and laywomen were allowed to hear the confessions of the dying and administer the sacraments, which again is more of a Catholic thing. But basically it's like required to ensure your soul is cleansed before you die. And normally you can only do that if you're an ordained priest. But because so many of them were dead, they literally didn't have enough to go around for the population. And they're like, okay, well, due to the everything happening, regular people can administer sacraments because we just can't get to everybody. Let me see something real quick. Thank you. That's okay. I believe you. It's like that. There was also this weird, what do we got here? Nice. Group known as flagellants. They were this religious group that would just go around and like whip themselves to atone for the sins that brought on the plague. Well, they tended to just spread the plague around because they were like literally whipping their backs off and flinging bits all over the town. It was gross. This did result in a more personal version of religion, rather than the pomp and circumstance of Catholicism, because nobody wants to go to these big churches. Everybody's dying. But when you are faced with death on a daily basis, one does want to become a bit more personal with their eternal end, I suppose. The flagellants also had real weird get-ups. These big conical hats, I should say. Obviously, again, they didn't wear the shirts because they were just whipping themselves and tearing chunks off. It was gross. Meanwhile, we had another papal schism because why not? Let's just make everything worse. Pope Gregory the IX returned the papacy to Rome. He then died. When the next pope was elected, Charles V of France wanted them to come back, and when they wouldn't, he instated a new pope in Avignon. So again, we have two popes. We have the one in Rome, which one would assume is just like that's the default, right? That's where the pope lives. But no, now we've got two. So they held a council at Pisa, and instead of picking one or the other, both popes were declared heretics, and a third pope was declared. And none of them stepped down. So we now have three popes. This resulted in the Council of Constance. All three were deposed. Martin V was elected. So we only had one pope, but then when he died, another, quote, anti-pope, which is a phrase I never thought I'd say until I started teaching this class, was elected in France, which wasn't cleared up for another almost 50 years. So, we had a big issue among the papacy for a while there, which resulted in the conciliar movement. Basically, there was a council at the church that had the authority to depose the pope if necessary, but only the pope could call this council. And after this particular schism, most popes were wary to do this because it seemed like their only purpose was to get rid of popes. This is similar to what we see in England with like the king, well, England and France, where the king can call parliament, but parliament typically wants the king to give up some of their powers because they've been abusing their powers, and so the king just sends them home. With this, if the pope's going to call a council, it's probably because everything's already on fire, and the pope's done a bad job, and he's going to lose his job. We did have a number of critics of the church because, again, we just had the Black Death, and the church was not able to fix everything like they said they would. John Wycliffe, he criticized the church's claim to be universal, while the church was obviously like very politically motivated. I mean, again, we just had three popes who were all supposed to be like the one guy who's speaking for God and therefore can do no wrong. He translated the Bible into English, which was a real big deal because the Bible at this point was only in, well, Greek, but then Latin, and you could only learn Latin by being in the church, and by, I mean, literally like being part of the church, not just like going to church every Sunday. So people weren't able to read the Bible for themselves. His followers were known as Lollards or Idlers because, I don't know, I guess they were more philosophical and spent their time thinking about things as opposed to doing stuff. And the English are real good about insulting other groups and just like naming them weird, like, not, I wouldn't go as far as to say slurs, but they're real good at inventing just mean terms for other people, which we will continue to see. Jan Hus, Bohemian pushed for primacy of the Bible over the rich, worldly, and corrupt church, which is to say, follow the Bible, don't worry about what some dude in a dress says. They called him to the Council of Constance in 1415, promised him safe conduct. However, when he got there, he was arrested, charged with heresy, and burned at the stake. So, yeah, how about that not lying thing, church? But, they wanted to get rid of him. And then we have Lorenzo Valla. He was an Italian. He worked with Alphonse I, who was I think it was the king of Sicily at the time. King of Aragon, Sicily, and Naples. Okay. I was partially right. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You don't need to know Alphonse. But he proved that the donation of Constantine, which had given all of this land to the papacy, was actually a forgery. Constantine never enacted such a thing. It was actually really easy to spot forgery because if you look at the thing and you know, like, medieval, I guess, Italian, it was written in medieval Italian and not in, like, the much older... Constantine wouldn't have even used... No, Constantine wouldn't have used Italian. He was Latin. Constantine was the emperor. I was thinking Charlemagne. No, we're going way further back. Yeah. So supposedly this document was written when Constantine was, emperor of Rome, but it was a medieval treatise and was clearly not written by Constantine. So there's John Wycliffe, Jan Hus being welcomed by the Catholics. Yeah, a warm welcome, right? And then here we have Lorenzo Valla. This is the donation of Constantine, where, again, Constantine supposedly is giving all this land to the church, whereas it was found to have been forged. And it was actually used later in the Protestant Reformation as further proof that, like, the Catholic Church was corrupt and blah, blah, blah. But, yeah, that's the whole thing. Politics also shifted because, again, the plague wiped out a good chunk of the population, and that's going to shift how everything works. So without peasants to work their land, the nobles were without income to support their liege lords, so therefore the kings were now without their own armies. So instead, kings started hiring mercenaries. And the thing about mercenaries, while they were expensive, they were really good at fighting. Well, I actually do have a bit of an addendum to that. Whereas the nobility typically were, nobility. They learned how to fight, but they were more concerned with getting back home and making money than actually fighting on the battlefield and winning. Whereas mercenaries, it's literally their job to fight and win battles. So they're usually really good at what they do. However, at the same time, we had cannons, so sieges were now no longer where you could just hole up in a castle and wait out the guys outside the walls. Your walls were getting blasted down. However, as the nobles were losing their income, they could no longer pay taxes to the king like they used to, so the king was also losing money. So the only way to make more money was to make new taxes, but the only way to make new taxes is to call in a council. Once again, this is just like what we were talking about with the Pope. Because if the king is calling in his nobles to have them agree to take on a new tax so he can make money, they're going to want something in return, which was usually repaying something that he did in the past or lessening his power entirely. something I discovered recently about the mercenary armies, at least in Italy, because the Italian city-states were always fighting. This was probably more towards the Renaissance, but we're getting there now. They would fake fight. Like you'd have a mercenary army from one city and a mercenary army from another city, and they were meant to like engage in battle in this field on this certain day. So the leaders from both sides would meet. Again, the mercenaries would meet, not the actual city leaders. The mercenaries would meet and be like, hey, so we're going to have this fight, and you guys are going to have to fall back, and then you guys can push back against us like it's this really even battle, and then we'll all go home. And they did that for years and made so much money. So yeah, that was apparently a thing that happened. It's great, yeah, because I mean, typically you're not, because while this is still an era of cannons, that was used for sieges. You're not shooting at each other. So if you're just a bunch of dudes in armor and shields and swords, and you're just like ramming against the other guys, it looks like you're fighting, but nobody's got to die. Everybody wins except for the city-states paying all this money. But also, to be fair, the Italian city-states were filthy rich, so they could afford it. By the way, the 100 Years' War is still going on, which we talked about before we even got into the Black Death. So it's been going on for quite some time now. There were several decades of Cold War. There was a civil war in France. So France was in real bad shape. France had been in bad shape since the start, but now they're having a civil war over whether they should capitulate to England or if we should have a new ruler and blah, blah, blah. King Henry V of England once again rolled into France with an outnumbered army and beat their asses. Battle of Agincourt, English archers maintained superiority over the French crossbowmen, and the French apparently still didn't know how to do tactics, which is to say they would charge into valleys where the archers were up on the hills and would just get pincushioned. The French deposed the Dauphin, which is the heir to the throne. Henry took his place. He married the king's daughter, and by 1420 began claiming his territory by force, which normally would be the end of the war, but it wasn't. Here again, I love these medieval art pieces where you just have the archers in front shooting at each other, and everybody else is just like waiting their turn. That doesn't seem efficient. But then again, proper archer placement wouldn't work on like a 2D scale like this. You got archers over here and archers over here, and then you've got infantry in the middle and the cavalry like charging the sides. You can't do that on a simple painting. So, fair. Yeah, there's Charles the Albert learning that the French don't know how tactics work. So they're charging into Battle of Agincourt. Again, you have archers on the hills, and the French charge right down the middle into Henry's infantry and cavalry. And while they're fighting, they're getting slammed from both sides by arrows. Eventually they retreat, and Henry's forces cut down the ones they can. Yeah, it did not go well. The thing about this, though, is this is almost exactly how the Battle of, oh nuts, I forgot the name of the battle. It was it was like the big battle at the start of the 100 Years' War. Crécy, there we go. Battle of Crécy, very similar. And this is like decades later, and the French just do it again. Anyway, this leads to one of the few things we actually learn about European history in America, and that is Joan of Arc. So the Dauphin Charles led a resistance against the English, but didn't have many people backing him. This led to a peasant girl who claimed she was seeing visions of God telling her to help Charles reclaim his throne. She led a force to Orleans, which was being sieged by the the English, sorry, that is a different thing, and managed to break the siege. And so, working with the resistance, she helped Charles become Charles VII at Reims in July, Reims being one of the big cities in France. Unfortunately, Joan of Arc was very intent on go ahead and finishing this war. So she was going to try to take Paris. However, Charles accepted a truce from the Burgundians, who were the side that his group had been fighting in the French Civil War this whole time. So when she led an attack anyway, her forces were defeated and she ended up captured. The Burgundians gave her to the English, who put her on trial as a heretic because she dressed in men's clothes. Can't do that. And was burned at the stake. Yes. Yes. And high heels. Exactly. Now, while Joan of Arc did not end the war for the French, she didn't lead this army to defeat the final fortress of the British and push them off of the continent. The fact that she was there as just like some random peasant girl and like saved a city, helped the heir to the throne at least get crowned in some level of legitimate way. It helped to really revitalize the people of France against the English and show that the English couldn't just take over France because the people didn't want them there. And even if they could defeat the armies, you've got literally millions of pissed off French in the countryside that are going to make life hell. And England doesn't have a very big population, so it just can't be done. So there she is here. I've actually, one more aside. So recently, and by recently I mean like in the last decade now, because I saw this back when I started teaching. Apparently a private collector in England managed to get a hold of what supposedly was Joan of Arc's ring. She had like a ring she wore all the time, and obviously when they burned her at the stake, they took all of her possessions. She didn't need them. So it made its way around England, museums and whatnot, and eventually a private collector got his hands on it because that's just something you can do in England. And he decides he's going to give it back to the French because she's a French hero. Why should the English have it? Which we should ask that about a lot of stuff in England. But anyway, the English government found out about this and tried to basically say that this wasn't a legal sale and that the French had to give it back. And the French government's response was, come and take it. Which is the most French response to an English demand you can ask for. And this, again, was like recently. Very funny. Very England versus Britain. Like, you want it? Come and get it. Come and take it from us. So, yeah. I don't think they were going to go to war over a ring, but that was the implication. It's like, we've done this for 1,000 years, guys. Don't think the world war is going to change our tune too much. So, finishing out this chapter, because the plague is largely over, well, sort of. the 100 Years' War is over. So this is what we think of typically when we think of kings and kingdoms in general in Europe. Um, Absolute control over the troops, permanent taxes to raise funds, which weren't a thing until this point. Taxes were like set periods of time, and then you had to call it in a council again to get them renewed or make new taxes. Um, he only called councils to, well, he only called councils when he absolutely needed them, because normally you would have councils pretty regularly, but since they kept asking for stuff, he just wouldn't call them in. Also, because of the nobility losing a lot of their income with the fact that most of the peasants are dead, they had to go to the king for work. So they were not just vassals under the king anymore, they were literally his employees. And this became, again, more common throughout Europe. Kings relying on towns rather than the nobility, because, as we've said, nobility tried to take power from the king when they could, whereas towns were typically run by merchants that are technically still like peasant class. So they can just tax them and not be bothered. So, a few specific changes, and then we are actually going to be done with the chapter early. That's great. Oh, wait a second. What do I have this set up as? Did I say chapter 9 again? No, chapter 10. Good. Okay. Meanwhile, after the 100 Years' War, oh, shoot. Yeah, after the 100 Years' War, England decides to have a civil war. We had House of York and the House of Lancaster. They both had claimants to the throne, and they just went to war over it. So for 30 years, England fought over this, after they had been fighting France for, again, 100 years. This eventually led to the Battle of Bosworth Field. Henry Tudor defeated Richard III and founded the Tudor dynasty. Now, the thing about the Tudor dynasty specifically, and the reason why this is one of the few things in European history or English history that we'll sometimes hear about over here. For one, this is Henry VII, which is father of Henry VIII, because that's how numbers work. And he created the Tudor dynasty, which specifically, House of York, White Rose, House of Lancaster, Red Rose, he just combined them. He, rather than, because he was Lancastrian, rather than just wiping out the House of York, he folded them into his new, I was going to say administration, that's not right, he's a king, into his new dynasty, I guess. Needless to say, after fighting a civil war for 30 years, after having fought France for 100, England was really destitute, specifically the monarchy. So to make money without having to call Parliament, who again would be asking him to give up some of his powers, he found ways to bypass this. He created a number of new taxes, which you weren't supposed to be able to do without calling in Parliament, but hey, who follows laws anymore, right? And also resurrected old taxes. So the ship tax we mentioned way back with the Vikings, where King Alfred the Great would have each port town had to raise enough taxes to build a single ship in order to protect England from the Vikings. So he used the ship tax and applied it to all of England. So even the towns and cities in the middle of England that had never seen the ocean before still had to pay this ship tax, because technically it was still on the books, and technically he could get away with that. He also had the Council of the Star Chamber. Basically, when his nobility would oppose him, he'd bring them in and torture them until they decided that they were his friend again. And specifically, this Council of the Star Chamber, like, again, I don't know how this was just a thing, but he's like, oh yeah, once you're in here, laws no longer apply. So it's just like, it's just a room, dude. How can you do that? But again, he was the king, so felt like it. Should be mentioned though that thanks to the 100 Years' War, Henry did not want to deal with the continent. Again, Crécy, or no, it's not Crécy. Calais is a port town in France, northern France. It was still technically under England's control, but when the French government finally got its shit together and was like, "Hey, we're gonna try to take this land back," Henry pretty much just gave it back to him. There was probably some negotiation. He probably made a little bit of money off of it, but it was like, rather than going to war with France again, let's just not deal with the continent, which is going to be a trait that his descendants will follow. Henry VIII. Technically, Elizabeth wasn't really getting involved in the continent. The continent got involved with her, but for the most part, the Tudor dynasty, we've got our own stuff going on. We've got Scotland we still haven't fully conquered. We've got all of Ireland to deal with. We're not going to deal with the continent for right now. So, yeah, this is a game that I've got. Anyway, House of Lancaster, House of York, and so they made the Tudor rows. They just combined them. It works. Meanwhile, over in Iberia, which is Spain, wasn't Spain yet, but, it's Spain. Isabella, heir to Castile, married Ferdinand, who is the heir to Sicily and Aragon. If you're familiar with the names, Isabella and Ferdinand, yeah, these are the ones that financed Columbus's trip across the Atlantic. However, there's this whole thing could be a movie. The king of Castile, Henry IV, known as Henry the Impotent, guess he didn't have any kids. He didn't want the marriage to happen because it would take power from him. It happened anyway with a papal document that was 100% forged. And also, Ferdinand snuck into Castile as he disguised himself as an ox cart driver. So the future king of Spain dresses himself as a peasant to sneak into Castile to marry Isabella because her uncle didn't want it to happen. And they've also got this magic document that 100% did not come from the Pope. There was so much drama behind this, which then resulted in a civil war anyway. We're doing a lot of that. So again, a lot of nobles didn't want to be unified with the rest of Spain, so there was a civil war. However, the new Spanish crown was too busy with other things, like pushing the Moors out of Spain entirely between 1482 and 1492 in the Reconquista, which is to say the reconquering of Spain. So this has been coming since the 1100s. Jews and Muslims were also expelled in 1492 and 1502, using the Spanish Inquisition as a tool of natural inquiry. Again, technically the Inquisition is supposed to go in and see if there's heresy happening, and then they do the torturing. The Spanish Inquisition, they just like to do both. Because people answer questions faster if you're, tearing their arms off. Now that said, while Isabella and Ferdinand married and joined the crowns and created what is modern day Spain, more or less, Isabella did not become this like second class ruler with Ferdinand as king. They basically kept equal power. She they still essentially ruled their halves of the kingdom separately. So she still had Castile as her own power. Um, and it was around this time that the queen piece in chess became what it is today, where it can do everything except, I guess, the knight jump. But because it used to be the queen could only do like the king, which is to say you can move one square in any direction, and that's it. Now the queen can go all the way across the board and diagonal. Yeah, the queen is the scary piece, and it's widely thought by historians to be because Isabella was such a force on the world stage, and also chess was really popular in Spain. Anyway, there she is, actually. Oh, right. How to do that. One of the, since we do still have time, unfortunately, nobody online is going to see this, but one of the favorite methods of questioning that the Inquisition would use, at least in well, I'm trying to remember. It was a movie about one of the artists from this period, and he was insane because he dealt with the Spanish Inquisition. It was simply called putting them to the question. And what you do is you tie the person's hands behind their back like this, run a rope over like a ceiling beam, pull their arms up like this, lift them off the ground, drop them, and then catch the rope before they hit the ground and pop both their shoulders out of socket. It's an injury that can be easily repaired and done again and again and again, and it hurts like hell. So rather than like pulling people's fingernails off, which they would do, or like burning people, or not burning at the stake, but like branding iron. Yeah.
Slightly more humane.
Well, in that they could keep it going, because like if you another method of torture that was very popular, but once is burning the soles of the feet. You shackle their feet and you just burn the soles of their feet with red hot irons. Now, because the soles of your feet are very sensitive, needless to say, that is excruciating pain. But once you've burned the soles of both feet, you can't do it anymore. With this, you can just keep going. Sure, eventually, they're not going to be able to use their arms like they used to ever again, but nothing's coming off unless you do it wrong. Yeah. So that was normal. All right, one more thing. The Byzantine Empire was fading. It didn't fall in 1402 because an outside force, which is to say a Mongol who was Muslim, opposed the group of Ottoman Turks who were besieging the city. So the Byzantine Empire was saved from the Muslims by another Muslim group because they're not a single monolithic group. The Turks and the Mongols didn't get along, even if they were the same religion. I mean, we've been talking about France and England fighting each other for 100 years, and they're both Christian nations, so yeah. However, the day finally came, April of 1453. 80,000 Muslim soldiers and about 300 ships hit Constantinople. Constantinople only had 8,000 people to defend it. And 3,000 of them were Western Knights. So they only had 5,000, like, local boys helping out. To be fair, it took them a little while to break Constantinople, because Constantinople was still like a major city. The Muslim leader Mahomet brought this huge cannon, which I have a picture of the replica of, that did break down Constantinople's double walls. So rather than having a single wall around the city, they had a wall and then like a space and then another wall. So if you broke down the first wall, you would only have that much space to work through, and they would still have troops in there and such to fight you off. Whereas this massive cannon just blasted through both of them. It took until the end of May, to finally take the city. The Emperor Constantine IX was slain in the fighting, which, I mean, if you're going to go out, that's the way to go, right? Rather than, oh, he was strangled in bed by an assassin, or he was poisoned, or he was running away and got shot by an arrow. He was fighting on the way out, so bless him. The city was renamed Istanbul. Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque because, again, I showed you guys pictures of Hagia Sophia as it is today, and it's just the same, but with the minarets. Istanbul became the capital of the new Ottoman Empire, which is the Turkish Empire, which eventually becomes Turkey. So there we go. But also, this sets us up for what would be next chapter, but obviously we don't have time. The West is completely cut off from the East. They're not able to go through Constantinople anymore to go, to China and India. And obviously, the Muslims that they have been slaughtering during the Crusades weren't going to let them through. So they had to shift their attention west. And this is when we start the age of exploration and people trying to go around Africa. And then eventually Columbus is like, well, the world's actually a lot smaller than people think it is. He was wrong. And then went west and got lucky because there was land out there. So all of this leads to that. But important year, 1453, is when Constantinople falls, and is technically considered the end of the Middle Ages by most historians. Because, like I said, the beginning is the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and the end is fall of Constantinople, which is the East Roman Empire. So they're good bookends. So here is Constantinople being sieged. Do I only have the one picture of that? Oh, no, I don't. All right, I have this. I already said I had that. So, like how we have our little Revolutionary War and many, many Civil War reenactments, they occasionally will do this to celebrate the taking of Constantinople and making of Istanbul, where they have their little reenactments. And I can't even see how many oxen that is pulling this thing. That's a lot going on. That's at least 4. I thought this dude was an oxen. That's his armor. Yeah. And then back here, those are barrels of gunpowder to fire this this ridiculously large cannon. And that's it. So, just as a reminder, next Monday is going to be a review day. You've got the rest of the week off. Well, not tomorrow if you've got classes tomorrow. Papers due today. If you don't have it, email them to me. Try to attach them as a document if you can. That'd be great. Easier for me to get my hands on. And I will see y'all next Monday for the review. And then, so next Monday's review, the Monday after is technically when our test is going to be. Are you going to take it that next Monday, or do you want to take it the Wednesday or Friday of next week when I'm going to be in here with my other classes?
So we're doing study on Monday, and then I can come
Wednesday or Friday
or Friday.
in here at 8:30 with my other classes.
Sure.
Okay. Which then means neither do I.
And if I don't wake up Wednesday,
You come in Friday. Yep. And it's at 8:30 in here.
8:30 in here.
Yep. It's 8:30 to 10:30, so you don't have to be here at 8:30.
Okay.
Just try to be here, give yourself time to take the test, which is, again, not any bigger than the other ones. Even though we did cover a little bit more, it's 50 questions, just like normal. See you next week. I leave. Just to mention to you guys, to remind you, I will be putting the test up on Blackboard for you guys next Tuesday. So you'll have an entire week to do it because, again, I need it by the following Tuesday. That's when grades are due. Anyway, that'll do it. I'll see y'all next week. Have a good Thanksgiving.